Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. Finally, a place to talk about the truth. It does. It feels like forever since we've been together. And I saw this on the calendar and I'm like, oh yeah, no guest. We decided we would do just us. So that's what we're going to do. This is, we don't have a title for this because we'll have the title after we talk and then we'll see what the title is. Sound good?
Yep. Sounds like a plan.
So I do have some ideas, which I emailed to you guys, but it's just been so long and a lot seems to have happened. So I want to talk, first of all, if that's okay, about Mimi's speech, what you did, what you spoke about, how it went, and then I'll talk about mine because I had some interesting experiences and we'll just sort of catch up. And the other thing I have is a few comments from our growing Facebook page, people asking questions and, would you do an episode on this? Would you do an episode on that? So I thought we could also talk about some of those things and just see where it goes. Sound good?
Mm-hmm. I don't think we'll ever have a problem on the things to talk about.
All right. So let's start with Mimi. So tell us where you went, what you spoke about, what the reaction was, anything.
Okay. So I went to, to the Community Mental Health Association of Michigan. And it was at Traverse City, which was quite pretty. Never really spent much time in that area of the country before. So that was really nice. And the speech was mainly just my story. That's what they wanted. So I just kind of based it on the book and just talked a lot about my story, but I also talked about clozapine, and I also had to put political stuff in there because I can't talk about this stuff without talking about that. At one point before I got there, I looked at my speech and I thought, this is a mental health organization. And I called the woman and I said, maybe you want to take a look at this because you know me, I can come off a little strong sometimes. And and so I sent it off to her. And then and she said, okay, she'll take a look at it. And then she emailed, and she'll have her boss look at it too. And then I thought, oh God, what can of worms have I opened? Are they going to try and edit this? And nothing. They loved it. And they said, go for it. She said, the only thing is you are really harsh on the mental health system. Duh. And that's who you're talking to, are CEOs of community mental health associations and things like that. So I did put a little caveat in there at one point of saying, I'm not blaming this on you guys. You guys are out there in the trenches with us, really trying and dealing with the same pitfalls and hurdles that we're dealing with. So it went really well. For my PowerPoint, instead of doing charts or anything like that, I just thought, I'm an artist, Nick's an artist, our whole family are, crazy artists. I just am going to show them pictures of my art and Nick's art and our family. So it didn't have any particular sequence or connection to what I was saying. It was just pictures. And it went really well. And I got a standing ovation, which is pretty cool for my first speech ever. There were a lot of people. There were 500 people. It was a huge room.
Wow.
People all sitting around tables. It looked like the Emmys or something. It was really a lot. But I don't know. I wasn't nervous. I was fine. And it was great. And then when it was over, I almost walked off the stage where there weren't steps. But I caught myself in time. And I was talking to my daughter and I said, well, I may be a big mental health advocate now, but I'm still Mimi.
Well, we're glad about that.
Yeah. And so, so it was good. It was good.
Did you get any comments after the speech so did you kick off this convention? You were the keynote?
No, actually I closed it. I was the last
speech.
And afterwards we did a book signing and I talked to a lot of people and, it's the usual stuff. Oh my God, I've never heard somebody talk and it sounds like my story. And, the thing that we all hear when we tell our stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's amazing. And I'm so glad you did that. And if you're listening, I'm getting emails and comments from people. And I know, we're all admins of the page and we all respond of like, I just found your podcast. I don't feel so alone. And so that always does my heart good. And, getting back out there and telling our stories, that's why we wrote our books. Our stories are powerful. And so I presented to Fellowship Place, which we had an episode with Mary Guerrera talking about this amazing place in New Haven, and they had an open house and they asked me to come be the keynoter. I didn't get on a plane. I didn't go to a new place, but I've got to share my impressions with you guys with that. So I spoke about the effect of mental illness on the family. And so the audience was people. And if you haven't heard our episode on Fellowship Place, check it out. It's one of the most well thought out, respectful, potential building, helpful organizations and places where people with mental illnesses can go and feel like a part of a community and have what they need to get better. It's in New Haven, Connecticut, and the work they do there is amazing. And the comments we keep getting are, where are there more places like this? And we've done a show on clubhouses, and clubhouses themselves serve, part of that as well. But this is a housing development and a clubhouse together. And I hadn't had a tour since my book came out 10 years ago. So it was great to get another tour. And maybe, I don't know how to, maybe I'll add some of the pictures I took to our YouTube version of this so that people can see, it's like you just go into a place and on the bulletin board, I want to just give our oral only, audio only listeners is just sort of a taste. And when you go to the bulletin board and they've put up tomorrow's schedule, I'm just looking for it here. And it says, 9 to 9:30 breakfast, 10:30, 11:30 men's group, 10:30 to 11:30 women's group, and then lunch. Then there's book club 1 to 3, basketball social 1 to 2, spelling bee 1:30 to 2:30. Computer lab is open 1 to 4. I mean, just like to see
A lot of things.
that's a typical day. And then they had the artwork of, there's a huge art room in there and beautiful, beautiful artwork for sale. And, just then on the bulletin board, why I want to work. So somebody posted money to find a girlfriend, to be motivated to get up in the morning, something to do, to put a smile on a kid's face. Like, it was just so lovely to see it again and get that tour again. And they have a facility for homeless to come and do their laundry and have a shower and get a meal. And it's a wonderful place. So I did a presentation about the effects of mental illness on the family, and in the audience were practitioners, members of their clubhouse. So I did get questions from people with diagnosed mental illnesses, family members, readers of my book, listeners of our podcast, and of course, the people who work there. There was one girl who raised her hand during a Q&A. And I had met her in the open house because she was sort of tagging along, and she has schizophrenia, and she raised her hand and she said, I was just wondering, because I can't get my parents to talk to me. They don't believe I have schizophrenia. And I'm just wondering if you're looking to adopt any daughters.
Oh.
And she just about, warmed my heart and broke my heart at the same time. And I said, I thanked her and said, I don't know how to tell you to convince your family. We usually have the opposite problem, that we can't convince our loved ones that they have an illness. Perhaps you can turn them onto our podcast. Perhaps there are books you can mention, or perhaps you can just embrace the family you've made here at Fellowship Place. But it was just, and then someone else came up to me with my book in hand and told me that she had read my book 10 years ago. It was the first thing that ever gave her hope, and she was crying, and her son's doing better and he's working. And so that's what we are all trying to do here. So in the speech, I spoke about what families need when mental illness strikes. And if we run out of conversation, we'll go back to that. Maybe you guys can add some tips, but it spells out the word search, and it's support, education, acceptance, respect, communication skills, and humor and hope. So that's just an overview. My son got a job today.
Yay.
I think I see on YouTube, you can see I've got all my fingers and toes crossed, but he's had a hard time. He hasn't been as accepted. His quirkiness has not been as accepted by the places he wanted to work at. But you know what? He kept going and he kept trying, and he's, going to be working in a huge retail establishment, but minimum wage is better than it used to be. And the restaurants he wanted to work at didn't say yes. One of them asked him who the vice president was, and he didn't know. And so I think they just felt he wasn't savvy enough. He knew the president, so that's good, but he doesn't pay all that much attention to. That's kind of a weird interview question.
That's a weird question to ask for a job interview.
I have to say that I don't know how he comes across on a job interview right now, because he's on a different medication than when he was waiting on tables before. But I'm very proud that he kept going. And he promises me he just took a drug test and he's going to be clean, because I'm postponing his birthday present till I get one of those. And anyway, that's where we are. Mindy, how are you?
Well, I'm good. I think you guys are better at promoting your books than I am, but I have had some speaking engagements. I've done the League of Women Voters. I have the Rotary coming up. But the one I'm more excited about is we have Judge Steve Leifman coming to Minnesota. He's the guy in Miami-Dade who worked with Norm Ornstein on the documentary, The Definition of Insanity, if you saw that. So Judge Leifman will be here, Norm Ornstein will be here. It's going to be at the Hubert Humphrey Institute, the place where my book launch was going to be, but it had to be me sitting where I am right now because of COVID. But this is going to be a really big deal. And we're inviting legislators, city council people, and you guys are better at marketing your books. I'm the advocate, the one who's working on legislative stuff. So we're trying to get, and then our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, will be there. We're trying to get elected officials and at the local, county, and state level to pay attention to the problems of criminalization of mental illness, anosognosia, the fact that families, can be banging on the door and nothing can be done if you are in, a state where the laws don't match reality. So I'm excited about that. But what I'm also excited about, and if you looked on my Facebook at all this week, which maybe you haven't because you're too busy, but the Nomi-Ramsey County, where I just finished being president, now I'm in charge of our project to get a Clubhouse International in our county.
Oh, great.
So remember when we had our meeting with Joel Cochran, and he asked at the end when we were finishing, he thought we would ask how to start a clubhouse. And we hadn't thought of that question, but he's the one that got me interested. So now we have toured one of the clubhouses in the neighboring county. And then this past week, and then last week, we've been systematically meeting with each county commissioner and the administrator who's in charge of adult mental health. And we've had with us a member of the clubhouse who herself has a mental illness, of course, as all the members of the clubhouse does. And when we share our stories with the county commissioners, she is the absolute best one. And she goes through, in a very eloquent way, the reasons for a clubhouse and the kinds of things she talks about. The biggest thing is the fact that a clubhouse is not a doctor or a social worker on top and the person with mental illness on the bottom. They have an equal relationship. So if they're making decisions on the board, the clubhouse members could outvote the staff. There's more clubhouse members probably on the board than there are.
When so we that's,
there,
That's amazing. And please keep us posted because, hearing how you go through this process will be helpful to everybody. If you are listening and you don't know what we're talking about, we encourage you to check out the episode about international clubhouses, because these are places where people with diagnosed mental illnesses are members, and they also receive the same sort of things we were talking about with Fellowship Place and places like that, a place to reach your potential, a place to explore your potential, a place to have friends, a place to belong, a place to just be. A place to just be. And so that's very, very exciting. And,
It is exciting.
I have to sort of say, I'm not that great at marketing my book. We always make it sound better than it is, but I love to, I love to speak. And the one thing I did with my book that finally got onto Audible is I redid the audiobook version of it to update it. So my book came out 10 years ago, but if you want to hear the updated version, it's only on audiobook and in my voice. And so you can get that on Audible, Ben Behind His Voices. And with the
See, right there, you're better at marketing your book. I forgot to even say my title.
Fix What You Can. I will put the picture on the YouTube as I always do. So that's very exciting. And I want to bring up something that came up on Facebook and just have us chat about it because it really touched my heart. So this is from someone on Facebook and asks us if we could talk about, I'll just read it. How do you all prepare for when your sons get discharged from the hospital, but you can't tell if they're stable yet? We haven't, he asked us to do an episode on this, and right now we don't necessarily have a guest, but we can kind of answer James's question right now. He says, I've listened to a ton of your podcasts. They're so enlightening, but I'd like to know more of the technical details of transitioning a loved one out of or into the hospital. Again, we can only share our stories, James. We don't, and we live in 3 different states. And, things are different. Mindy knows more about this from a legislative point of view, obviously. But I think each of us can share some of our stories. Mimi's son doesn't live with her right now. Mindy's does, sort of. Mine doesn't, but has. So we can talk about and I will just add to this before I open it up here that there was another thread on Facebook. There are a lot of groups, families dealing with serious mental illness. There are a lot of groups where people are talking and giving each other support. And one woman was saying, I believe it was a woman, could be a father, but I don't know, that, she's having a real hard time with her particular son living in the home with her, and that she's scared, but she wants to stand by her son, and, doesn't want to kick him out. And a lot of the thread was, you got to stand by your son. You got to stand by your son. And I said, there are ways to stand by your family without allowing your son to live with you. I just said, I don't know your situation, but I have to say there are ways to stand by someone and also provide boundaries, that there may be other people in your family to consider. And sometimes finding your loved one another place to live is the best way to stand by them. So I didn't get much backlash. I got a few likes and loves on that comment, but it was kind of the black sheep in that thread because it, so what about that?
I say something about that. I
Please.
think that we need to be honest and realistic about this. And the template that applies to other families doesn't apply to us. There's a dynamic of your kid is sick, and even if your kid's an adult, it's your kid and they're sick and you're supposed to take care of them, and that's what society expects of you. But you even said, she said she's afraid. I mean, there is nobody, nowhere is it written that you're supposed to put your own self in danger. And this disease often creates that. And I think that we need to give ourselves permission to protect ourselves and to protect our families. Nick hasn't lived with us since he was 18. He never came back. We always provided him with an apartment, but it was not hard for me at all. I made up my mind when Nick was 18 and I had a 14-year-old and a 9-year-old in the house that my daughters had to be safe in their own home. And it broke my heart. I can't even calculate what it cost my soul to ban my son from the premises, but I did because they had there's a hierarchy. There's a Sophie's Choice thing that's in all our lives now, and we have to be honest about it. And I think that we're not giving anyone any help by pretending this isn't true. We have to make tougher choices.
When Jim is, he's doing really well right now, so that's why he's able to be here. But when we were afraid of him, and longtime listeners of this podcast know that Jim had delusions that he had to kill me in his early years with schizoaffective disorder. So, and then he had, vivid command voices where he did do some really terrible things, always to himself, I might add, like burning his arm every day with the same cigarette lighter and so forth. But when I was afraid of him, I did not wait until it was time for discharge. The minute he got out of the hospital into a place, I went there the very first chance and said, we need to start working on a discharge plan right now, because when he's done here, however long he can be here, I hope it's a long time, then he's going to have to go somewhere besides our house. So that would be my strongest recommendation. Don't wait until it's time for discharge if you are not going to allow your family member to come home. Start working with them right away, because they'll assume you are taking them home, and that is what they will do unless you insert yourself.
I would say that I feel the same way. And in my book, I do tell the story of the first time I had to say that. I mean, we ran the gamut from, before Ben was sick enough to, and I'm using air quotes, you can't see them on the podcast, but, sick enough to be hospitalized, I was trying everything under the sun, as we all did. And the therapist that said, oh, just find him an apartment. The problem is, you're too of much of a helicopter parent. If he's in his own apartment and he's in, I'm like, fine, we'll get him his own, I'll pay for 3 months rent. We found him a place where he was on the bus line. He could have gotten a job. And if he just took his meds, he would be fine, but he didn't take his meds. And, the stories, there's a million stories in the Naked City. Oh, am I dating myself? But at any rate, that's the story you hear a lot. And it was in his own apartment, finally, that he didn't take his meds enough to be stable enough. And he was finally hospitalized. And 5 times in 1 year, and every time he got discharged to his own apartment, or sometimes to us, but even in his own apartment, there was no supervision. There was no way for him to take his meds. So at the 5th time, when we were out of private hospital stays, we were in state care, like we ran out of money, we ran out of charity. He was finally in the hospital with the plastic chairs instead of the cushy armchairs. And he finally began to stabilize on Clozaril at that time. And as you guys know, we do really like Clozaril, but we're not here to promote any particular medication. My son is not on it right now, and whatever works for you. I met someone this week who said my son's on an Abilify injection and doing great. So whatever works for your loved one is the best thing. But at the time, they went in for a discharge meeting because he was getting there, and they said, is he coming home to you? And I said, no, he doesn't have a home. He's homeless. I had to use that
when you
language.
have to do those kind of things, you immediately, you feel like a monster.
You do.
I mean, because in society, people don't behave that way. When we were raised with that, but we're on a different game board here. One time with Nick, when we finally got him DHS assistance after 20 years of me going to his house every day.
What's DHS?
Department of Health and DHFS, Department of Health and Family Services. It's the caregivers. I've been doing that up here when we moved him up to Washington, and kept his house clean as a pin. And I, kept everything in order, and everything was nice. And I thought, they're going to show up and they're going to see this and they're going to say, he doesn't need help.
He's fine. Right.
And so I didn't do anything dishonest, but what I did is before that appointment for like 3.5 weeks beforehand, I didn't do anything. I let him go back to his natural habitat, and it was appalling,
Yeah.
but it worked, and it wasn't fake and it wasn't a lie. But I mean, the thing is, if we do everything, we'll never get help. And I'm not going to be here forever. None of us are.
Exactly. So I applaud. And this is one thing that I think we can do a service to the community by talking about providers who do things right. And so at that time, the social worker after that meeting pulled me aside, and I thought she was going to tell me, how can you do that to your son? Like I thought she was going to judge me. She said, I just want to tell you how much I applaud what you did in there. I said, really? She said, I've been working here a long time. Do you know how many, and my son was 21 at the time, he's now 40, but she said, you know how many people come in and out this revolving door over and over again in their 40s and their 50s because they keep going home to their parents and they don't do what they're supposed to do. So you have given your son a chance to find his independence, and I applaud you. And that's when I burst out in tears, because be nice to me, that's when I'm going to cry.
Yeah,
But that's always the way. When they're nice to you is when you cry. That is so true. And I think the providers know that. The other thing that I do and have done, I don't have to do it, haven't had to do any of this for the last 3 years. But what I used to do is not just wait for them to find places. You know, the case managers have databases and lists, but I have found that I have more time and resources to be able to find suggestions for where Jim could go than they do. So all of us who are savvy do not wait for the professionals doing the air things too, to find places. Scout out things yourself, and they will be happy and relieved if you can find some place and suggest it.
Okay, that's great. And is that something NAMI can help with?
Any place you could go, you know, the best place I ask is other family members, actually. Other family members and people I know who are social workers, and where would you put your child? And, you know, that's a whole different answer than what you might get for your choices if you put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I just think resourceful families need to use every connection they have when you're advocating for your
And
family.
just to be, you know, we have spoken in past episodes about some success stories. And yes, there are the private facilities that I can't afford. And, you know, a lot of people can't afford, but some can, that are $10, $20, $30, $40,000 a month, and they work miracles. But when you're doing your research, look for the places that may be state run. And, you know, if your child is, I do know families whose kids are under 18 and they have to like declare them a ward of the state and kind of disown them or disavow them, or however you do it. Find a way to transfer your loved one's care to the state so that they can get into a state facility. But I love your idea of suggesting, if I had my choice, this is where I think my child should be, or my husband should be, or my mother should be. I mean,
Right.
you know, we are three moms, that's who we are, but there are other people going through those situations.
I
And
actually
again,
also
don't
suggested to
feel
Jim.
guilty.
Pardon me?
Yeah. Whoop, we both talked at once. I
didn't catch it.
Again, don't feel guilty. You know that you're doing the best thing for your kid, and society's opinion of that doesn't matter. If society was so great, society would have created a good mental health system, and it hasn't.
Exactly. And I was going to say then, I don't just give my suggestion to them. Sometimes I give it to Jim, because the mental health system listens more to the person with mental illness than they do to the mother. And I was going to say about Randy, the ward of state business, we don't have to do that here in Minnesota. So that's the beauty always of this podcast, is other states are different, and some things are better in one place than another, or worse. And so hopefully you could get rid of that, having to do that in your state, because that's very sad. Most of ours are not state run in Minnesota, they're county run, which is why we're lobbying our county for things that we want.
right. And that's the beauty of the three of us being from three different states. And and interviewing people very early on. We talked about what country?
Romania.
Romania, that things are done differently in different countries, and maybe we can get some ideas, but certainly check with NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, in your particular state. They can offer legal information, they can offer legislative information, and see what's going on in your own state. We had 3 different experiences, except emotionally. And so, there is so much comfort in advocacy. And when you get to that point, when you're in crisis, it's different. For instance, on Facebook, we had another comment that said, "Will I ever feel normal again? The grief and anger still take my breath away some days. I'm sorry to vent. I'm going to start listening to more podcasts soon. Thank you." So I just want to put that out there while you absorb that. I want to share one other little story having to do with past guests. And I do encourage you, dear listener, to look at past episodes for a topic that really touches your heart or touches your particular situation. We did interview the most amazing Judge Lisa Wexler of Connecticut. And we made it a 2-parter because it was long and there was a lot to say.
She was so great.
She was so great. And, again, talking about what gets done right. So she is the judge in charge of my conservatorship with my son. And so I had to fill out a form, what's going on, the finances, blah, 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 blah. And I get a call from the probate and I'm like, oh, what did I do wrong? What didn't I fill out correctly? And the person says, no, I'm just calling, on behalf of Judge Lisa. And she read, everything's fine. But she just wants to know, could your son use any job coaching? Because she'd be happy to set him up with something. Like, it was just, so I don't know how she does everything. She's got a radio show every morning and she does the judge thing, and then she has a chance to reach out. So it's just such a wonderful thing when something like that happens. We also had Mike Macniak on, who's with Melissa's Project in Connecticut. And he emailed me this week to say people are still calling his agency because they heard about him on our podcast. So we're delighted to bring you guys resources. So anyway, let's go back to this kind of newbie in this family situation, and says, will I ever feel normal again? The grief and anger still take my breath away. Yeah.
I think we all remember that feeling so well. And it goes on, at least for me, for the first few years before it went away. And then every time Jim relapsed, it would return.
Yeah.
I think we all have to just make friends with the term, the new normal, right? Because that's our only option.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, excuse me. As much as I have my moments, like we all do, it does get to be pretty normal. You know what I mean? It's just, this is our life. I think if you had a kid who had an accident and was in a wheelchair, I'm constantly amazed at what we can get used to, and live with and still have joy. Because that's the thing. I know what she's asking. She's asking, will I ever be happy again? Will I ever have another carefree moment? Will I ever not be worrying for 1 second? And the answer to that is absolutely.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. The good news is, and I've been in that state for the last 3 years. I mean, Jim is 44. It took a while, but when his meds are right, and for him, it's clozapine is a miracle drug, and he has the right supports, and he's working, then it can go on and on and on. I still hope and pray he doesn't have another relapse at some point. If something happens, you never know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we have talked about this before, and, grief takes time to process and you never get over it. You carry it. And there certainly is, again, in that comment, grief and anger. And there's a lot of things that families feel: grief and anger and loss and disappointment and fear and frustration and going broke. And, all of those feelings we talk about when we all get together in support groups or family to family or anytime we're together. But for me, it helps when we're having a good moment to not let my mind skip ahead to what if next week isn't as good as this week. I mean, that is what really, last Sunday, and every time I pick my son up, I'm like, how's he going to be? Is there, because he is on an injection, which is great. But also as it starts to kind of wind down, there's so there's sort of a period of like, is the time release working properly? And we had a lovely, we were just sitting around on the deck and he was playing with his nieces and nephew and they were like, oh, Uncle Ben is here. They were so excited. And I was like, oh God, this feels almost kind of like normal. And like you said, Mimi, it is the new normal. It's a different kind of normal to get used to. There was so much joy in that moment that we could create a new memory. That's what was huge for me, that we could create a new, nice memory together as a family. Will it be the same next Sunday? I have no idea. Will he keep this job he just got? I have no idea. But if I can get another good new memory and just add it onto my charm bracelet of good moments, I'm glad to get a new, because there were times when I thought I'm never going to have another good memory with this kid. It's all just going to be responsibility and fear. And there is always hope. And shout out and respect to the families who have lost their loved ones fully to this illness, to the point where they've committed suicide or, they've died for other reasons. And we know that for you, the hope takes a different shape. It takes the shape of just getting used to the loss of a more final kind. And so
One of the county commissioners that we meetings today, one of the women there, her son had died by suicide when he was 23, just a year and a half ago. And here she is still advocating for a better mental health system for other people. I'm not sure if I would be that altruistic and strong, but she is. And so it's quite something to behold.
Well, like Jerry Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. This woman is the same type of person as Jerry Clark. But Jim is doing so well right now. We have so much joy that I have to say, when I'm at these groups, when everybody else is telling their stories, I'm beginning to feel guilty, because one group I met with this afternoon, not the commissioner group, but one of my support groups, somebody's 23-year-old son is missing and has been for over a month. Someone else relapsed on meth, and everybody has something. And so I don't share much about Jim. Instead, I talk about what I'm working on with the clubhouse or something, because I'm to the point where I feel guilty. Jim is doing.
Which, you know what, that's a really sad thing to stop and consider for a moment.
I know it.
Because we live in this world, of our brethren, our people, our tribe, who we have to feel guilty in a situation like that, And, I had a thing that used to happen back when things were a three-ring circus, where every time I get together with friends and have like a moment to relax, anything anybody said, they'd preface it with or stop shortly afterwards and say, oh, but I know it's not as bad as what you go through, Mimi. And, at one point I said, all right, announcement. Just because my son has schizophrenia does not mean that you have to be happy about getting a speeding ticket. Talk about it, complain about it. It's okay. And I think, our friends freeze up. And I mean, it's a sad reflection of what this does to a life.
And if I were in any other group besides a group like ours, or like the ones I was in today, where everybody's children have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, then I wouldn't feel guilty. Then I'm the odd person out in that regard. My son is working half-time at minimum wage, and there's just no comparison to the other type of kids. But in our groups is when I have to resist, I guess, feeling guilty.
Yeah.
That's so great. So I think this has been so nice to just chat. What's coming up is we are having Norm on this show coming up, right?
Oh, that's right. Yes, I'll see him on
next week.
He's in Minnesota, I think. I will, because it's the end of July, right?
Yes. And is that July? Oh, it's almost the end of June already. Okay. And we do have my cousin Danny coming on to talk about SSI and SSDI. So we have a practical topic coming up. When Norm comes on, he's going to be talking about...
I think he will be talking about what he's always talking about, which is their son, Matthew, had anosognosia. He did not recognize he was ill. And in their state, they could not get help for him. I'm sure Judy Harris, Norm's wife, who's coming on the program too, might say her typical line, which is, our family can call into the White House. It doesn't matter who the president is. But to get our son help with his mental illness, no one would listen to us. We couldn't get any help. So their son died. He did not commit suicide. They may choose to talk about how he died, but it was an accident. And it's in the book, Bedlam covers that story. It's also in the documentary. No, I think they cut it out of the documentary, but it's in the book Bedlam. So that's what we talk about with them.
Yep. So that's coming up. So, subscribe to our podcast. You'll know when there's new episodes, and subscribe on YouTube. And we are having Pete Early come on next month as well. And we'll talk about more on the dad's point of view. And also he's an investigative reporter, talks a lot about the jail system and the mentally ill. So we have a lot of great stuff coming up. I want to just close with asking you if you want to just add a little word or two. When I talk about what families need, the first thing we need is support. So what I told them at Fellowship Place is, don't shut us out. Give us resources and information. Tell us about support groups. Tell us about NAMI. And that kind of ties into education. Give us info who to call and when. And under acceptance, I said, tell us the truth. Accept our grief. Listen to our reports if we have something to tell you about what we observe. You're nodding heads, so that's good. The R in search is for respect. Don't assume it's our fault or that we're too controlling. No HIPAA, and know what information you can give us. Communication skills, help us learn, recommend books like I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, LEAP training. We did have Dr. Amador on the show, Family to Family. And then hope, don't laugh at us, but help us laugh together if possible. Tell us about some success stories. Remind us that this takes time. So those are just my final tips. Anything to add to that? Was that pretty much covered?
I think that was a complete list.
All right. Well, guys, I have missed you. We have a few more episodes of season 2. I don't know how we're, the season is 25 episodes. That's what we decided, right? So we will definitely meet that. And we are looking forward to having additional guests on. If there's any topic you would like us to talk about that we haven't, or any guest you think we should have on, please contact us. You can go on our Facebook page, just Google Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches. You can comment on our YouTube video, our Facebook page, subscribe to our podcast. We appreciate your ratings and your reviews. And thank you for listening. Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches with Randy Kay, Mindy Greiling, and Miriam Feldman. To get in touch with us or to learn more about our books, please visit our websites at miriam-feldman.com, mindygreiling.com, or randyk.com.